and we conference call I was on this week. Last year's symposium, where they usually have an annual symposium, went online because of COVID. This year's is still going to be online because of COVID. They're going to try to hold next year's in the same city, but they can't use the same location because the hotel has gone out of business.
That's what I'm talking about.
To get to what you said earlier, and I did post this. I don't know if you saw this, but this is something I thought when this all started. Americans are great at rallying together. Look at what we did with World War II and this and that and the other thing. We're just going to all come together and hunker down and fight this thing and beat it. But I didn't expect that the president would take the side of the virus.
What do you? I don't understand. What do you mean by that?
I mean, he was telling everybody to do exactly the wrong thing if you were going to try to stop the spread.
Well, a lot of people were saying a lot of the wrong things, which is why I stopped listening to anybody. Because anytime you turn on a news station, a radio station, if you listen to anybody, you can get, if you listen to 17 different doctors, you would get 17 different opinions quite often.
Well, that's only because the politicians were picking and choosing the doctors they talked to. I mean, overwhelmingly, the medical profession was of one voice, but, people who didn't want masks would keep firing and hiring new doctors until they found someone who said masks were dangerous, and they kept that one, and so on and so forth. I mean, there were a lot of folks, for whatever reason, and, they made a lot about, we have this right, but they cost people their lives, and I have no sympathy for them.
Well, the whole... I think we're on the same page. I wear a mask wherever I go, and we made this statement off the air, and I've made this statement on the podcast many times. The secret behind this pandemic, it was advertised before it even became a big deal. Look, social distance, wear a mask, wash your hands. If you do those three things, everything else is just it's less than icing on the cake. Okay, it's the crux of the matter. And I tend to be a trusting individual, kind of. When the government tells me something, I'll believe them until they step on their toes. And Dr. Fauci was a perfect example. When he first came out and said, you don't have to wear a mask. And then he came back and said, yeah, you do have to wear a mask. But the reason I said you didn't have to wear one before is because I was afraid that people would hoard all the masks and the healthcare workers wouldn't get them. And besides, I didn't want the healthcare workers to scare the people because they were wearing a mask. To me, he was dishonest with that statement. And at that time, I don't care how smart he was, he should have been replaced. And I've had trouble believing anything he said since then. Now, that being said, I personally believe that most of what he says is just fine, but he was dishonest from the beginning. So I can understand why some people thought he was full of baloney, because when he first started off, he tried to deceive the people.
One of the problems you have when you have somebody who's basically a medical / scientific person who is under the control of a politician who can fire you for saying the wrong thing, you will tend to try to at least modify what you're saying in favor of your own employment. I never had an issue with the masks because I always figured, long before anyone even thought of COVID, if masks did nothing at all, why do medical people wear them?
Well, and that was my whole thing too. I mean, look at any television show or any movie that you have a doctor in the operating room. They always wear a mask, and that mask is not so that they don't catch something from the patient. It's so they don't give something to the patient.
And this is what the I've got a right not to wear a mask argument was aggravating about, because it's like, I've got a right to endanger you argument. If it was just them, I'd be happy to let someone not wear a mask and catch the disease, but they were not wearing a mask in order to give it to me.
Well, sure, and it was to me it was, if nothing else, a matter of common courtesy. In fact, I refused to argue. I will say I had a discussion with somebody one time about how it's his right not to wear a mask, and I said, you're right. I don't disagree with that, but do you understand that it's my right to fart in public if I want to? It's my constitutional right. And he looked at me. I said, but I'm not going to do that, because that's not how people act. Okay.
I'm going to use one analogy, and I think Joe wants to say something, but I always got a kick out of when someone screamed about the government having authority to force you to put something on your body. Have they ever heard of indecent exposure laws? Government does force you to put things on your body.
Sure. Yeah. No argument there.
I was just curious if anybody, some of these economic wonks have ever figured out how much masks contributed to the economy last year. I'm sure, and I know you don't hang there a lot, but I'm sure you saw Eugene's Santa Claus mask get up.
Oh, it was hilarious.
And I have. We did go over to my sister's for Christmas, and it was 12 people in a house for about 4 or 5 hours. But I ordered a mask that has colored LEDs in it. It has
I saw that.
9 different settings, of immediate blinkiness in any color you want. But I wonder how many people, we decided when this was going to be obviously what was going to happen. Those blue masks are so boring. So, if you got to do it, we've been trying to have fun with it.
Yeah. Oh, you have to. You have to.
Well, I like to point out something that's kind of interesting from a geopolitical and political standpoint. Largely, the people objecting to masks were the far right, which are overwhelmingly white folks. If you've been watching my stuff, you've noticed that most of the numbers are coming from Europe and North America. This is because even though, for example, China and India together have about 2.5 billion people. And they are having very little problem with COVID.
India's having a big problem with COVID, though.
It's way down. That peaked months ago. And one of the main reasons is Asian cultures are not mask averse. Africa is not having, South Africa a little bit, but Africa for the most part is not having trouble. They've dealt with Ebola. They already knew how to handle something like this. It's been mainly Europe and North America that have been really having a lot of trouble. When I say North America, it pretty much means the United States. Good heavens, we've got 1/4 the population of India, and we have twice, 2.5 times the number of COVID cases.
Well, your point with the Asian societies, especially the Asian societies, I've been to Asia countless times, and they just wear masks anyway.
Whenever they're sick, they wear a mask.
Correct. Or they wear masks because of the pollution too. But the gentleman's name escapes me. But this was in the very early 1900s in China. They had a pandemic, and there was a doctor that said, "Look, here's what I think you need to do. Wear these masks." And he told the reasons why, because it'll stop the spread. It doesn't protect you per se, but it protects the other people, and everybody wears it. The other people are protected. And what they expected to be a terrible pandemic that was going to kill millions of people turned out to be not such a big deal because everybody wore a mask. And other Asian cultures copied that. And it doesn't matter where you go in Asia, Vietnam, the Philippines, Japan, Taiwan, they just wear masks. Now, I think a lot of that also is because they're a lot more crowded than we are for the most part. But they are mask wearers. They are. And I have to think that's helped a lot.
And there's a big thing about proper manners, which has kind of gone away in our society, but they're still very much in that.
Well, the two things, though, about Western culture, and I'll use North America, United States, and Europe, not so much Japan and Korea, because while they are a Western society, they're also an Asian culture, okay? But we tend to do, if the man says do this, we're going to question authority. That's just the way we are. That's just the way the United States is. That's just the way many Europeans are. So we're always going to question authority. And in this case, it hasn't helped us. And many times it has helped us. It allows us to be individuals. It allows us to be free thinkers. It allows us to not do things the way we've always done them, but we'll do things just a little bit differently. Most of the time, it's been to our benefit. Unfortunately, maybe not this time.
Well, there's nothing wrong with questioning authority. In fact, heaven knows I'm one of the big ones for doing that. But when you look at what the authorities are saying and you find out they're right, rather than, there's just too much automatically assuming they're wrong rather than actually questioning. There's the automatic assuming there's something fishy here. If they're saying it, I better not do it, without any checking. Just a knee-jerk opposition.
Well, and I think a lot of that, to me anyway. First of all, I think it's common sense. I will always question authority. That's why I never served in the military, and I don't think that I would have done a good job, because if they told me, okay, first thing you have to do when you get up in the morning, you have to make your bed, I would say why. And I think I'd be in a lot of trouble for doing that, okay? Because that's not the way the military works. But a lot of it is common sense. Okay, the question is asked, you have to wear a mask. Why? Because of this. Okay, makes sense to me. I'm in. But that's just not how our society works. And unfortunately, people are going to do what they want to do. And I've not been one to argue with somebody who doesn't wear a mask, although I think it's the right thing to do. I'm not going to lecture them. I'm not going to talk down to them. But I'm just going to shake my head and think, you know what? Why do we have to be this way? Because I understand where they're coming from. I do. I just disagree with them. Does that make sense?
Well, Joe, do you have something? I'm sorry.
No, I'm fine.
I was going to say I don't argue with them either, because you can't win. Something else I put up on one of my Facebook posts was, there's no one more sure of themselves than someone who is completely wrong.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing, most people are wearing masks. I think most people are social distancing. Most people are doing the right thing most of the time.
It's improved considerably.
Yeah, it has. And the COVID numbers are awful. But what would the COVID numbers be if we weren't doing what we're doing? Nobody knows the answer to that, not for sure. But I will say this. Most people are doing the right thing. Most people are being prudent and wearing a mask and doing the right thing. Most people are. And what do the flu numbers look like this year? They're almost.
I haven't looked at them. That's an interesting thing, because I did compare last year's flu numbers.
They're almost non-existent.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you that I have not had even a cold in over a year. Not even the sniffles. Nothing. And is it just because the luck of the draw? I always have 2-3 colds a year. Every year I get 2 or 3 colds. I just do.